I didn't notice the red light at first. It was buried in the clutter of my life, between unwashed coffee cups and half-finished sketches, blinking faintly like a heartbeat I'd forgotten was mine. The small lens faced the window, the one that looked out toward the yard where the dog liked to sleep beneath the oak. It wasn't my camera. I would have sworn on every piece of quiet I owned that I didn't put it there. But before the footage, before the discovery, there was a different kind of silence, the kind that comes when you've run out of people to call and start talking to the walls instead. That's where he comes in. The dog. I met him 3 months earlier on a rain-heavy evening that smelled of asphalt and electricity. I'd left the city behind, a necessary escape from the apartment where my ex still haunted the wallpaper, and rented this old cottage by the edge of the woods. The landlord said it was peaceful. What he meant was forgotten. The mailbox had more cobwebs than letters, and the only consistent sound was the whistle of wind through the broken gutter. That night, thunder rolled low over the hills. I was unpacking boxes when I heard it, a single sharp yelp muffled by rain. I told myself to ignore it. Strays wandered through sometimes, the landlord had warned, but the sound came again, higher this time, strained, and something in me cracked open. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped into the storm. The rain hit like gravel. The beam of light sliced through sheets of gray until it found him. Small, soaked, caught in the wire fence behind the shed. One hind leg twisted in the mesh, blood mixing with mud. His eyes met mine, wide and terrified, and the sound he made wasn't a bark but a plea. "It's okay," I whispered, kneeling. My fingers shook as I untangled him, the metal biting into my skin. When he stumbled free, he didn't run. He just stood there, trembling, as if waiting for permission to collapse. I lifted him into my arms, pressed him against my chest, and carried him inside. He smelled of wet leaves and panic. I wrapped him in a towel, set him by the heater, and watched the steam rise from his fur. He watched me too, eyes dark and endless. "I guess it's you and me," I said. He blinked once, slow, deliberate agreement. I named him Shadow because that's what he became. A quiet presence that followed me from room to room, filling the space where loneliness used to echo. In the mornings, he'd wait by the door, tail sweeping the floor like a metronome, ready for our ritual walk through the dew-soaked grass. At night, he slept beside the bed, breathing steady, as if guarding my dreams from everything I refused to remember. For weeks it was just that, simple, almost sacred. The world outside the fence blurred into irrelevance. I stopped checking my phone, stopped caring about the headlines, the noise. The only things that mattered were the wind through the trees and the rhythm of his paws beside me. Then came the day I found the camera. It was early October. The air had that brittle chill that tastes of rust and endings. I was cleaning the table when I noticed the tiny red blink reflected in the window. At first I thought it was a trick of light, but when I looked closer, there it was, a small device tucked behind the stack of old books on the shelf. Black, sleek, deliberate. For a second I couldn't breathe. I unplugged it. The light died, and the silence that followed was heavier than thunder. I turned it over in my hands, heart hammering. There was a slot for a memory card. I slid it out. Part of me wanted to throw it straight into the fire. But curiosity, the dangerous kind that tastes like fear, won. I plugged it into my laptop. The folder opened automatically, file after file, each time stamped, weeks of them. The first clip started with static, then focused on my yard. The oak tree swayed in the wind. Shadow trotted into view, nose to the ground, tail high. I smiled despite myself. Until the frame shifted. It wasn't the camera moving. It was a reflection. Someone had filmed through a window. My window. A chill crawled down my spine. I clicked another clip. Nighttime this time. My lights glowed in the darkness. I could see myself sitting by the table, sketching. Shadow was curled at my feet. The camera zoomed in slightly. The glass caught my face. Tired, unaware, intimate. My hands went cold. Every file was like that. Me, him, our small routines captured without consent. The walks, the mornings by the fence, the way I talked to him when I thought no one listened. Even the night I'd cried into his fur, whispering that I didn't know how to be loved without being watched. The irony burned. I don't know how long I sat there, frozen, watching fragments of my own life replayed through a stranger's lens. Shadow nudged my leg at some point, sensing the shift in my breathing. When I finally looked down at him, he was watching the screen too, head tilted, a low whine escaping his throat. "It's okay," I lied, shutting the laptop, but my voice trembled. That night I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house sounded like a footstep. Every gust of wind like someone whispering my name. Shadow stayed alert, ears flicking, eyes reflecting the dim light from the hall. I kept the camera on the table, a black secret I didn't know how to handle. By dawn, exhaustion had hollowed me out. I walked outside, half expecting to see footprints in the mud. There were none, only the marks of paws trailing toward the woods. The following days blurred into each other. I told no one. Maybe because admitting it would make it real. Maybe because I'd already learned that disbelief is heavier than danger. Instead, I watched. I moved the camera to the cupboard, removed the card, waited. I wanted to see if whoever had planted it would come back. Each night I checked the locks twice. Shadow started sleeping by the door. Sometimes he would growl softly into the darkness, a warning only he understood. On the fourth night, I heard it. The faint crunch of gravel outside, careful, slow. Shadow lifted his head before I did, body stiff. My breath caught. The sound moved toward the window, then stopped. I turned off the lamp, heart hammering so loud I thought it might give me away. Through the curtain's edge, a figure, tall, hooded, stood by the fence. The glow of a phone lit his face for a second, too quick to register more than the glint of eyes. Then he turned and disappeared into the dark. Shadow barked once, sharp and fierce. I waited until morning before stepping outside. There, by the gate, lay a piece of paper weighted by a small stone. My name, written in black ink. No envelope, just the words, "You looked happier when you didn't know." I stared until the letters blurred. The handwriting was unfamiliar, deliberate, almost neat enough to be kind. I thought about leaving that day. I even packed a bag, essentials, documents, the leash, but when I looked at Shadow, lying calm beside the door, something in me refused to run. He'd come from fear and found safety here. I couldn't teach him that safety was temporary, so I stayed. Instead, I turned the lens outward. I bought my own camera, placed it by the window facing the yard, not to catch someone, at least not exactly. More to reclaim the act of looking, to remind myself that I could choose what to see. The first nights, nothing happened. The footage showed only the sway of branches, the blur of insects near the porch light. But on the seventh night, just after midnight, the motion sensor triggered. A shadow moved along the fence line, tall, slow. Shadow, my dog, rose from his spot, silent. He didn't bark this time. He watched. The figure approached the gate, paused, then crouched. The footage grainy, unclear, but I could see the hand reach out to the latch. Then, before the gate opened, Shadow lunged forward. The figure stumbled back, startled, and ran. The camera caught only his retreat, the streak of darkness disappearing into the woods. I exhaled for what felt like the first time in weeks. When I stepped outside later, the ground by the gate was disturbed, mud pressed under heavy boots, a broken branch, and something else. A silver keychain shaped like a crescent moon. I pocketed it. Shadow wagged his tail once, proud, waiting for praise. I knelt beside him, pressed my forehead to his. "You did good," I whispered. He sighed, a sound that felt like relief. From then on, things shifted. The fear didn't vanish, but it changed shape. It became awareness, sharp, useful. I started locking the windows before dusk, walking with purpose instead of dread. Shadow matched me, stride for stride. The tension between us wasn't anxiety anymore. It was partnership. The camera stayed pointed outward, recording the world instead of me. And though I told myself I'd stop watching the footage eventually, I didn't. Each morning I reviewed the night before, learning the patterns of the world around me. The rustle of foxes, the sweep of headlights on distant roads, the occasional human shadow that never came close again. Sometimes, when dawn broke over the field, I'd turn the camera off and just watch the light rise in real time. Shadow would rest his chin on my knee, eyes following the sun as if he understood how endings and beginnings were the same thing. It was on one of those mornings that I realized the footage, the original, invasive one, had changed me. It had caught something real, the way I'd looked at that dog like he was the only living thing left worth trusting. Whoever filmed it might have meant to humiliate, but they'd captured proof of something honest, and I would never be ashamed of that. Still, I kept the note, folded tight in the drawer, a reminder of what it cost to be seen. Autumn thickened. Leaves burned gold and fell in slow spirals. The days shortened until the world seemed built from dusk. I painted the sky once, huge strokes of rust and silver, and hung it above the mantel. Shadow barked at it for 3 days straight before deciding to accept it as part of the house. When the rain returned, harder this time, I stopped walking the forest trails. Instead, I filmed the storms from inside, the way lightning fractured across the wet glass, how Shadow's reflection appeared doubled beside mine, two shapes surviving weather together. One night, unable to sleep, I scrolled through old clips again. Near the end of the folder, a final file appeared I didn't remember saving. No timestamp, just one word for the title, caught. My throat tightened. I pressed play. The frame showed my living room from the same angle as before. But this time the camera wasn't hidden. It was sitting openly on the table. I was in the shot, sitting cross-legged on the floor, stroking Shadow's fur. My laptop screen glowed beside us, the words "recording in progress" visible at the bottom. I remembered now. I'd left it on by accident the night I reviewed the security footage. In the clip, I looked directly at the camera. The expression on my face was strange, calm, almost defiant. I reached out, turned the lens toward the window, then leaned forward until my voice filled the speakers. "If you're still watching," I said to whoever had hidden the first device, "you don't own this story anymore." Then I'd switched it off. Watching it back now, months later, I felt something unclench deep inside. I closed the laptop, turned to Shadow, who had been sleeping but woke as if on cue. He stretched, yawned, and looked at me like he was asking if it was finally over. "Yeah," I said softly. "We're okay." He pressed his head against my shoulder. The warmth of him anchored me, heavier than any fear. Outside, the first snow of the year began to fall, silent and slow. Each flake caught in the porch light like ash turning into light. I watched it melt against the window pane, thinking of all the things that vanish the moment you see them. And how. Sometimes being caught isn't about exposure. It's about being found. Shadow sighed beside me, the sound deep and even. I reached for the camera on the table, turned it so the lens faced both of us, and pressed record. Not for them this time. For us, snow fell through the night, quiet as sleep. By morning, the world was white and unfamiliar, as if someone had erased it and forgotten to draw it back again. The road, the trees, even the fence line, gone beneath a clean, unbroken surface. Shadow pawed at the window, leaving smudges of melted breath on the glass. He wanted out, his tail sweeping the air in wide arcs. I laughed, the sound echoing strangely in the stillness. "All right," I told him, "but stay close." Outside, the air bit at my skin. The snow came up past my boots. It crunched underfoot with a sound that felt louder than it should, a soft breaking in the silence. Shadow bounded ahead, his dark coat bright against the white. Each jump scattered light, little suns bursting and falling. I stood for a moment watching him, remembering that there had been a time when I thought I'd never feel safe in open space again. The fear had made me small. He had made me wide again. The camera from the night before still sat on the table inside, the little red light off now. I had left it recording until sleep pulled me under, capturing nothing but the slow rise and fall of breath. When I'd watched a few minutes of it that morning, the footage had looked almost peaceful. Almost, now. As I watched Shadow dig at something near the fence, a sound pricked the air, the faint hum of an engine. My heart clenched. Out here, any sound that wasn't wind or water meant intrusion. The hum grew louder, then stopped. A car door slammed. Shadow froze, his head lifted, ears sharp. "Easy," I whispered, stepping toward him. Through the curtain of snow, a shape formed at the end of the drive. A man in a thick coat, head bent against the cold. He waved once, an uncertain gesture, before starting toward the house. I felt the old instinct rise again, the one that said hide. But Shadow didn't growl. He wagged his tail once, curious. The man stopped a few feet away, his breath misting. "Sorry," he called. "Didn't mean to startle you. I'm, new in the area. My truck got stuck in the drift up the hill. I saw your smoke. Thought maybe you had a shovel." His voice carried the raw, unpolished tone of someone who wasn't used to asking for help. I hesitated, studying him. Mid-30s maybe, rough hands, a face weathered by work and weather both. Not the hooded stranger from the night of the note. "I might," I said finally. "Wait here." Inside, I found the old metal shovel by the back door. When I returned, Shadow was sitting between us, tail sweeping slow arcs into the snow. The man smiled down at him. "He's a good one," he said. "He's everything," I replied before I could stop myself. Something flickered in his eyes, understanding or maybe recognition. He took the shovel, thanked me, and trudged back toward the road. I watched until he disappeared into the white. When I turned back, Shadow was still watching the direction the man had gone, head tilted slightly. I crouched and rubbed his neck. "We're fine," I said, though my pulse hadn't slowed. "He's just a stranger." He pressed against me, warm and certain. By evening, the snow stopped, leaving the world silver blue. The quiet felt different now, too full, like air holding its breath. I lit the fire and made tea, the small motions grounding. Shadow lay by the hearth, eyes half closed, paws twitching in dreams. I should have felt peace. But as I sat there, staring at the flames, a small unease began to gnaw at me. It was the man's tone. Kind, careful, familiar somehow. I tried to place it but couldn't. When the kettle hissed again, I realized what it was. He had said he saw my smoke, but the wind had blown in from the opposite direction all morning. From the road, my chimney wouldn't have been visible at all. My stomach tightened. I got up and checked the locks, one by one. The house was quiet except for the fire. Still, I couldn't shake the sense of eyes somewhere beyond the glass. I sat with my back to the wall and the camera in my lap, its weight heavy, deliberate. Shadow woke and came to sit beside me, his body a steady line of warmth against my side. "We're fine," I told him again, softer this time, but my voice sounded like it belonged to someone else. For days, nothing happened. The snow melted in thin, reluctant layers. The road cleared. No sign of the man, no cars, no new notes by the gate. Yet the feeling stayed. At night, I started hearing faint noises again. The creak of wood, the rustle of branches that didn't match the wind. Sometimes I'd wake and find Shadow sitting up, eyes fixed on the dark window, his ears perfectly still. The second time it happened, I turned on the camera. If someone was watching, I would watch them back. For 3 nights, nothing. Just the hum of the radiator and the soft rhythm of our breathing. On the 4th night, I caught it. A flash, barely a second long but clear, the reflection of another lens across the field. It caught the light when lightning forked through the clouds, then vanished. Someone was filming again. I felt the blood drain from my face. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped the camera. Shadow stood, low growl rumbling through his chest. "Stay," I whispered. "Not yet." I moved to the door, heart pounding, and looked out. The yard was empty, the trees shifting in the wind. The snow reflected the moon, bright enough to hurt my eyes. Then I saw it. A faint line of footprints, leading from the woods to the far corner of the fence. They stopped there, at the edge of the property. I followed them only halfway, before fear pulled me back. The night had teeth again. Inside, Shadow waited by the door, tail low, eyes tracking every movement. I knelt and whispered, "If they come back, we'll catch them." He licked my hand once. Solemn. The next afternoon, I called the sheriff's office. The voice on the other end was polite, distracted. "Could be hunters," he said. "Or kids. Happens every winter. Keep your doors locked." That was all. I hung up before my temper could catch up to my words. By evening, clouds rolled back in, heavy with new snow. I set the camera on the windowsill, lens aimed at the woods. Then I waited. Shadow lay at my feet, eyes open, breathing shallow. The fire crackled. Hours passed. At some point I drifted into half sleep. When I woke, the fire had burned low, and the world outside glowed blue. Snow again, thick and relentless. The camera's red light blinked steady. I reached for it, half expecting to find nothing, but the last clip told a different story. At 2:37 a.m., motion triggered the lens. A figure moved through the snow, slow, cautious, hooded again, the same as before. They stopped near the gate, then turned toward the window, toward me. The image blurred as if they knew exactly where to stand to distort the focus. Only one thing was clear, the faint glint of metal in their hand. Then, suddenly, Shadow appeared in the frame, a dark blur sprinting from the porch. He hit the fence hard enough to shake it, barking with a sound that cut through even the recording. The figure stumbled, dropped the object, whatever it was, and ran. The clip ended there. Morning brought pale sunlight and the evidence left behind. A small camera lying half buried by the fence. I picked it up with gloved hands. Heart hammering. The same model as the one I'd found months ago, only this time the lens was cracked, half filled with snow. Whoever had been watching had wanted the story back. I turned it over, looking for a name, a mark, nothing. But there was another note, folded small, tucked under the strap. "You're good on camera." The words made my throat close. I burned the note in the fireplace without reading it again. The paper curled, turned to ash. Shadow watched, silent, his tail unmoving. For a week, the world held its breath. No footsteps. No sounds beyond the ordinary. I started to think maybe it was over. Then the letters started coming. No envelope, no stamp. Just folded sheets slipped under the door while I slept. The first said, "I like the way you talk to him." The second, "You look peaceful when you think no one sees." The third had no words at all, only a photograph. Me and Shadow, walking along the fence line, my face turned toward the light. The date printed on the bottom was yesterday. I tore it up, every shred shaking in my hands, but the pieces still made a picture on the floor. That night, I left every light on. I began recording myself intentionally. Not out of vanity, out of defiance. If someone wanted to watch, they would see what I chose to show. The next video I made was simple. Me and Shadow by the fire, reading aloud from an old book of poems. My voice steady, his head resting on my knee. I uploaded it anonymously to a small video forum, tagging it only for whoever's been watching. Within hours, it had hundreds of views. Comments filled the page, people asking where it was filmed, calling it haunting, beautiful, strange. Somewhere in the chaos, one comment stood out. "Finally, you're looking back." It came from a new account. No photo, no name, just that. I stared at it until the letters blurred, then shut the computer. Shadow pressed closer to me, his heartbeat steady against my palm. "We're being seen again," I whispered. He exhaled through his nose, almost like a sigh. Outside, wind rattled the shutters. The house groaned, old wood settling around us. I wondered if safety had ever really existed, or if it was something you built and rebuilt every day, knowing it could collapse at any moment. I fell asleep on the floor beside him, camera still rolling, firelight flickering against the lens. When morning came, I found fresh prints in the snow again, only this time they didn't lead to the gate. They led away, from the door, across the yard, toward the woods, and beside them, smaller prints. Paws, shadows. He'd been outside while I slept. I ran to the edge of the trees, calling his name until my voice broke. No answer. Only the hollow echo of sound swallowed by distance. My chest caved in. The leash hung limp in my hand, a useless thread. Then faintly, a bark. I turned. There, halfway down the hill, a flash of movement. Shadow running back through the snow, breath misting, tail high. When he reached me, he dropped something at my feet. A scrap of torn fabric, dark and wet. I crouched, picked it up. The smell of oil and earth clung to it. Shadow barked again, urgent, as if telling me to listen, and then, from far in the woods, came the faint whir of an engine starting. I looked down the slope, heart pounding, the wind biting hard against my face. Whoever had been watching was leaving, but the story wasn't over yet. Shadow stood beside me, muscles tense, eyes locked on the road vanishing into white. "Let them go," I whispered, though I wasn't sure if I meant it. He didn't move. Snow began to fall again, soft as breath, erasing every track, every proof of what had happened. All that remained was the mark of our feet side by side, leading back to the house. We turned toward home together. The wind carried the sound of tires fading into distance. Then, nothing, just silence. Inside, the fire had gone out. The camera's red light blinked once and died. I sat on the floor with Shadow curled against me, my hands buried in his fur, feeling the heat of him seep into the cold of my skin. For a long time, neither of us moved. The world outside the window had returned to stillness, but I knew better now. Stillness didn't mean safety. Stillness was just the breath before the next sound, and somewhere in that silence, I heard the faintest echo of my own voice from an old recording. "You don't own this story anymore." But I wasn't sure who I'd been speaking to. Him, them, or myself. Morning came without color. The sky was gray paper, the air heavy with thaw. I hadn't slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the footprints disappearing into snow, heard the faint hum of an engine receding into distance. The silence that followed had weight. It pressed against the walls of the house, filled my chest until breathing hurt. Shadow slept beside me, his body curved against my legs. He twitched sometimes, chasing things in dreams. I envied him the simplicity of it, how easily he could return to peace after fear. When I finally stood, my joints ached. I made coffee but forgot to drink it. The world outside looked scrubbed clean again, as if nothing had ever happened. That was the cruelest part of winter. It erased evidence like guilt. I turned the camera back on. Its red light blinked once, then steadied. I pointed the lens at myself and pressed record. My reflection stared back, eyes ringed, mouth drawn tight. "If anyone ever finds this," I said quietly, "I'm not scared anymore. That's the only thing worth knowing." I stopped the recording, set the camera on the table, and went to open the door. The air that rushed in was soft, damp with melt. The first sound of dripping water came from the eaves, a slow rhythm, steady as a clock. Shadow bounded past me, nose low to the ground, following the faint scent of earth beneath the snow. He circled the yard once, then returned with a stick in his mouth, tail high. I smiled for the first time in days. "Good morning," I said. He wagged once and dropped the stick at my feet. Simple. Perfect. Alive. That afternoon the sheriff called. "They found an abandoned vehicle near the forest line," he said. "No one inside. We're checking fingerprints." "Was it the same one?" I asked. "We can't confirm yet." His tone softened. "You'll be all right now, ma'am. It's probably over, probably." That word carried all the uncertainty in the world. After he hung up, I sat on the porch steps with Shadow pressed against my thigh. The wind had shifted. It carried the scent of thawing soil, the first hint of spring. The field glittered under the weak sun. It looked peaceful enough to believe in. But peace was something I didn't trust easily anymore. That night, I dreamed of light. Not the harsh glare of cameras, but warm, forgiving light, spilling through open windows. In the dream, I walked toward it barefoot, Shadow pacing beside me. There were no watchers, no fences, just the slow widening of horizon. When I woke, dawn was seeping into the room, painting the ceiling the same gold I'd seen in sleep. I decided to walk further than I ever had before, to the ridge past the forest, where the land fell away into the valley. Maybe it was foolish, maybe brave. Sometimes the difference is only what happens next. I packed a small bag, water, a sketchbook, the camera. Shadow watched, tail thumping softly, as if he'd been waiting for me to make that decision. "Come on," I said. "Let's find where this ends." The snow thinned as we moved through the trees. Patches of brown grass peeked through, damp and stubborn. The sun broke free of the clouds around midday, and the world turned bright enough to hurt. I filmed as we walked, my voice low, narrating for no one in particular. "This is the ridge," I said when we reached the clearing. "This is where the road disappears. This is where I stopped being afraid of shadows." Shadow barked once, the sound carrying far into the open air. It startled a flock of birds from the trees. They rose in a single dark wave, then scattered. We sat there for hours. The valley below shimmered with meltwater, rivers cutting silver veins through the land. For the first time in months, I felt the pull of something other than fear, something like belonging. When we finally turned back, the sky had deepened to amber. The light slanted long through the trees, turning every branch to gold. I carried the camera in my hand, still filming, letting it capture the rhythm of our footsteps, the soft crunch of snow, the steady sound of breathing. Back at the house, I uploaded the footage to the same anonymous channel where I'd posted the reading. I titled it The Walk Back. No description, no explanation. Just 30 minutes of quiet, of movement, of ordinary life. It spread faster than I expected. By midnight, comments filled the page again. Some kind, some confused, all fascinated. People said it made them feel calm, that it looked like a dream they couldn't quite remember. One comment came from the same account as before. "Now you're not looking back. You're just seeing." I stared at the words for a long time, then closed the laptop. Shadow lay asleep on the rug, paws twitching. I knelt beside him, traced the line of his fur with my fingertips. "We're seen," I whispered. "But this time it's ours." The next few weeks blurred into a rhythm I could live inside. Morning walks, afternoons painting, evenings editing small clips from our days. The followers grew by the hundreds, then thousands. People said the videos felt real, too real, like something you weren't supposed to watch but couldn't turn away from. Sometimes I wondered if I had become the very thing I feared, a performer behind glass, feeding strangers pieces of myself. But then Shadow would nudge my hand, grounding me back into the ordinary. His presence kept the story true. Spring came full at last. Grass replaced snow. The creek behind the house began to murmur again. I stopped locking the windows at night. The air that moved through the rooms felt safe now, part of a world that had forgiven me for surviving. And then, one morning, another letter arrived. No handwriting this time. Just a small printed card slipped through the mail slot. It read, "Thank you for the ending. I turned it over." Blank on the back. No address. My heart didn't race. I didn't freeze. I simply placed it on the table beside the old broken camera and let it stay there. Maybe it was from them. Maybe from someone else entirely. It didn't matter. Endings weren't threats anymore. They were choices. That evening, I set up the camera outside for one last recording. The sky was clear, the first stars beginning to tremble above the horizon. I sat on the porch with Shadow at my side, and for once I didn't speak to the lens. I just let it watch. The world glowed in slow motion, the flicker of moths near the light, the sway of tall grass, the shimmer of his fur in the wind. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called. The air smelled of earth and salt, and something like forgiveness. I reached over and scratched behind his ear. "We made it," I said. He leaned into my touch, eyes half closed. For a while we stayed like that, two small shapes inside a larger silence. When I finally turned off the camera, the red light blinked out with a soft click. It was the first time that sound didn't make me flinch. I carried it inside, set it on the shelf, and didn't press play. Weeks passed. The video slowed. I started painting again. Larger canvases this time. Fields, dogs, women with open hands. When people wrote asking where I'd gone, I answered simply, "Home." Shadow aged quietly, the gray creeping into his muzzle, his steps slower but steady. We grew old together in small increments, measured not by fear but by seasons. The past became a story I could tell without shaking. Sometimes I still heard phantom sounds in the distance, the hum of engines, the click of shutters, but they no longer belonged to danger. They were just echoes of what once was, passing through. The last painting I finished that year was of light spilling through a window. Inside the frame, a dog sleeps, outside snow falls, and in the reflection on the glass, a woman looks back. Not at herself, but at the world finally still enough to be real. I hung it above the mantel, beside the first photo I ever took of him. One night deep in summer, thunder rolled over the hills again, the same low sound that had started everything months before. The air smelled of rain and electricity. I opened the door and let the storm in. Shadow stood beside me, fur ruffling in the wind. Lightning flashed, bright and brief. For a heartbeat, I saw us reflected in the window, two silhouettes framed by light. It struck me then how every moment we live is already being recorded somewhere, by the world, by memory, by the eyes of whatever loves us enough to keep watching even when we turn away. I whispered into the storm, "We're still here." The thunder answered softly. When morning came, the world was washed clean again. I brewed coffee and watched the light crawl across the floor. Shadow slept soundly by the door, the old camera glinting faintly on the shelf. I picked it up one last time, turned it in my hands. It still worked. The red light blinked obediently when I pressed the button. I aimed it at the window where the sun spilled through and began to speak. "This isn't a confession," I said. "It's a beginning. I used to think being caught was the worst thing that could happen. But maybe being seen, truly seen, is how you start again." I looked down at Shadow. He opened his eyes, blinked slow, and thumped his tail once. "We're done hiding," I said. I left the camera running as we walked outside into the gold morning. The field shimmered with dew, each blade of grass holding its own tiny reflection of the sky. The world was recording itself without needing me anymore. Shadow trotted ahead, turning back every few steps to make sure I followed. I did. The path wound toward the woods, the same place where fear had once lived. Now it looked almost gentle. Halfway down the hill, I stopped and turned. The cottage stood small against the horizon, windows open, curtains fluttering. I could see the camera through the glass. Still blinking, still watching, I smiled, not at it, but at everything it had taught me. Then I whispered the last line of the story, not for the recording, but for the wind itself. Whoever's watching, this is where I stopped being the subject. I took Shadow's leash in one hand, though he didn't need it, and we kept walking until the house disappeared behind the trees. Later, when I played back the footage weeks afterward, the final frame showed only the empty yard, the door wide, sunlight pouring in. The sound that filled the room wasn't silence, but the low rhythm of waves somewhere beyond the microphone's reach. Steady, endless, alive. The camera had caught what I hadn't noticed then. A feather drifting through the open air, turning once before landing on the step, and then the film ended. No more watchers, no more fear, just the quiet proof that we'd existed long enough to be free.